a month away from the season starting, and it's time to ramp up a little bit of the SEC content here. And first off, we got to talk about my Florida Gators here, a team that has had so many ups and downs over this past season, and at least to me, this really feels like a team that if a couple things can go their way, and most importantly, DJ Lagway stays healthy, this is a team that I think could be really special for a number of reasons. I mean, obviously we can talk about DJ Lagway in general, right? I mean, he's from Wills, Texas, number one quarterback back in 2024, appeared in all one game when he started his 7 starts, going 6-1, about a 60% completion percentage, and a little under 2,000 yards for 12 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. Named freshman All-American by Football Writers Association. So all the hype surrounding him is completely legit. And I'll be the first one to admit on this show that I was a little bit slow about him, particularly just because I thought Florida had a great quarterback in Graham Mertz, and it felt fitting for them to kind of let him finish out the season. But obviously, since he got hurt, it just kind of segued into Lagway playing. And ultimately, it worked out as well as it could have, even though you think of the debacles that they had against Miami and Texas A&M, and then you think of the highs that they had versus Ole Miss and some of those games that later in the season. But in any event, I mean, the biggest thing that's been happening this offseason is well, we know that Billy Napier is going to be calling plays again, which, I've said this multiple times that I wish that they would hire a legit play caller. I know that Russ Callaway is technically the offensive coordinator, but we all know it's really the Billy Napier show when it comes to offense. And then defensively, you have Ron Roberts, who's going to be a defensive coordinator again. I think it's kind of been said that he's always the guy who's been calling the plays. And they did have Austin Armstrong as their co-defensive coordinator, but he decided to take the job with Willie Fritz and go to Houston. So that's good for him. But as I've been watching this Florida team this off season, I think I've said it before that I don't think it's too big of a concern that we didn't see Lagway throw too much in terms of Florida spring training camp, but it seems like it's been ramping up a little bit. It's been more kind of like an unofficial sort of workout sessions back in May and June and all that good stuff. But I think we're at the point now where even if he's not 100% ready to go at the beginning of the season, I mean, it's not like they're playing anybody too crazy at the beginning of the year. I mean, you play Long Island University and UCF, so even if they need, obviously you want to be ready for the UCF game, I think. But if he wasn't there for the Long Island game, it's probably not the end of the world. But you're definitely going to need him for the LSU game and then the Miami game afterwards. So all things considered, I mean, I do think that they're doing a really good job at just kind of making sure that they're really kind of stringing him along as naturally and just as patiently as possible, because you definitely don't want to be forcing things with him. And I know that's kind of been just an ongoing storyline with the Gators this offseason. And, I think it's going to work out as well as it can be, because I think the one thing that you also have to point out too is that, this offensive line allowed 19 fewer sacks in 2023. And this is a well-experienced group that I think Lagway is going to have no issues in terms of protection. You have All-American center Jake Slaughter, and you also have Austin Barber, who has 26 starts. And then you also have Damian George Jr. to round out that offensive line. And, I think just from the outside looking in, I think you have to be excited if you're this offensive staff, knowing, hey, you're going to have good protection for DJ Lagway. You have Jaden Bowe and Jacoby Jackson are both physical and super explosive, and two younger guys who are going to round out that running back room, who are going to replace Mount Charles Johnson. I think I've said this over and over again on the show, that Florida needs to find more ways to run the ball. And when you have two talented guys like that, you got to be creative in terms of how you can make that work. Because to me, one of my biggest questions, aside from DJ Lagway's health, is how is this wide receiver room going to look? Because when I look at this wide receiver room, obviously the big key playmaker is going to be Eugene Wilson III, who's coming off a hip surgery, super explosive guy, can really score on anywhere in the football field, whether it's the red zone, whether it's midfield, you name it. He's a guy that can kind of do everything. And also, too, I'll even throw Dallas Wilson out there, who, at least when I saw in the spring game, I mean, this dude went off. He had about 9 or 10 catches, just a guy that I think is going to be really exciting to watch. And also, not to mention, when you have, Hayden Hansen, 6'8", 271, a guy with, just really, in terms of at least an NFL build, that's a guy that he at least can block on the perimeter, and probably someone who can catch a couple routes for you too. And not to mention the UCLA transfer that I'm really excited about that I don't think enough people are giving recognition for is J. Michael Stravant, who's 6'3", 216, and, a guy at least for UCLA last year with Ethan Garbers was one of his top receivers that he looked to in various situations. So I think that's going to be another kid that I think as time progresses and as fans get to know him better is going to be a guy that I think is ultimately going to be a really, really strong weapon for him. So yes, you do have some worries there in terms of maybe the top of the wide receiver chart, maybe being a little bit younger. But at the same time, too, a lot of these guys are kind of big home run threats, guys that you can trust and to be physical, to be explosive, to be guys that are just really strong route runners in general. And not to mention, too, I'll even throw Vernell Brown III in there, too, as another true freshman who is going to play a pretty solid role in this offense. But, like I said, I'll say it time and time again, the big concern I have with Florida, aside from just, typical, stuff in general, is just the play calling with Billy Napier. I've said it time and time again, is sometimes we just get a little bit too conservative in terms of play calling, in terms of just situational awareness. So I'm just very much concerned that, ultimately that's going to come to pass again, because, I've done segments on the show before kind of comparing Billy Napier's play calling from when his time at Louisiana compared to now. And to me, there's just not enough evolution to me in terms of where, this kind of team has gone, because, at the same time too, yes, they had really strong wins against LSU and Ole Miss, and they won a bowl game for the first time since 2019. Those are all really exciting things to look forward to. But at the same time too, it's how do you build off of that? And most importantly, how do you make sure that you're maximizing DJ Lagway and his abilities? Because, I think I would argue that's probably one of the biggest reasons why he didn't get fired last season, because Lagway has such a strong relationship with Billy Napier that if Florida decided to fire Napier, then DJ Lagway is going to be gone too. And then especially you're starting from ground zero. So that's definitely something to kind of keep in mind as we go through the season, and, just something to be on the lookout for in general. But I definitely want to show some love to this defense too, because, at least when I look at this team defensively, particularly in the pass rush, I think, again, this is going to be a pass rush that I think is going to be probably one of the top in all of the SEC. And we'll start with Tyreek Sapp, a guy who I think is going to cause even more chaos this season. 6'3", 274, had 7 sacks last season, 13 tackles for loss, and I think is the bona fide leader of this front line, and somebody that I think is only just going to get better from here. And also, too, I think one thing I was missing with Florida for last year in terms of their pass rush is they definitely just needed a little bit more help, which is the reason why they brought in George Gums from Northern Illinois, who put up five sacks and 35 stops last year. And, in general, too, I think Florida's going to have a really nice rotation this year of guys who, yes, you have the Tyreek Sapps of the world and you have the George Gums, but you also have some solid rotational guys such as Cameron James, who I think could be a solid addition, and a guy that we talk about, perhaps next season, the next season after, depending on how everything works out too. Because yes, it is great that Florida is returning 7 defensive starters from last season. And yes, they need to hold up better versus the run. Yes, they need to get off the field more. But I would say, all things considered, they did a great job of getting some takeaways last year, particularly from a lot of the sacks that they got. But also at the same time too, given that all the criticisms that they got last season, they really did a decent job at really kind of holding themselves together and really doing the best job that they can. And at least for me, when I look at this, I keep going back and forth that Texas A&M game where Texas A&M literally ran the ball 12 straight times for a 90-something plus yard drive. And, to me, it's like Tyreek Sapp just can't do it all. So it's good that they brought in George Gums and a couple other guys that I think are going to help solidify that interior front and really make it a lot more difficult for these SEC programs to run the ball on Florida, because that was definitely an issue that has been kind of ongoing. Even I think of the past couple seasons too, where I don't think this is necessarily a new issue. However, I do think that Florida's done the best job that they can at making those changes, given that, they're investing more in facilities. They're getting more in NIL, and they're really doing a good job at really just getting a lot of freshman prospects that I think can be legitimate guys that add value on day one. Because I think, at least for me, the secondary was probably one of the biggest question marks of this secondary. And even any Ron Roberts coach defense, you're always going to have a little bit of a problem in the secondary, right? I mean, even if you go back to his days in Southeastern Louisiana, that's something that he's always had an issue with in terms of being a defensive play caller. However, there are some solid names at corner that I think are worthy of being excited about. You got Dijon Johnson, you got Devin Moore, you have Cormani McLean, which, assuming he stays out of trouble, transfer from Colorado, that I think could be a solid playmaker too. And also Michael Caraway too from Southern Miss, who are all solid enough to be able to really kind of solidify this secondary a little bit more, which is obviously solid. But I think for me, the bigger question is going to be, yes, a lot of these guys are relatively experienced, but how can you translate that experience into guys that ultimately become shutdown corners and being able to take that next step into making some of those bigger plays? Because yes, it's great that Florida got a bunch of takeaways, but a lot of that was generated because of the pressure that they got from the quarterback, not necessarily because of the safety play. So yes, I do agree that ultimately the defensive line is probably going to be one of the bigger strengths of this team. However, they only really did it from the pass rush last year. So I say to myself, hey, if this interior defensive front can really kind of come together, and that experience in the corner room doesn't get beat on, pass after pass after pass. I mean, this is a team that I would say to myself, if they really don't win anything more than probably 8 games, there's going to be some people who are definitely be calling out Billy Napier, because especially when you look at their recruiting classes in the past couple seasons, 9th in 2025, 7th in 2024, 13th in 2023, and 18th in 2022. So they're only getting better in terms of recruiting. Billy Napier's gotten all the resources that he has, and you have a bunch of really strong playmakers that I think you can't help but obviously be excited about. And when you're 19-19, your past 3 seasons, people and the expectations are only going to get higher. So it's time for Florida to put up some results and to really try to take care of business as best as they can. And obviously, it's tough having to go to Death Valley in September, and then you play Miami after. Then also you have Texas, which, by the way, Texas spanked Florida last season. So when you kind of put all those things together, I think Florida has to find a way to win at least 8 games this season.